Good morning. Yeah, they say how much? 2 to 5. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Just a couple of announcements. We do have our next membership class on Sunday, so I will be over teaching the membership class for Sunday school, and Nathan Stevens will be doing the adult Sunday school over here. I'm sure you'll enjoy that. And then also later on that day, we're doing the AV ministry training here in the auditorium. So if you're signed up for that, we'll do that during our afternoon service. And if you're not doing that and would like to stick around, we will have a guided prayer time over in the education building down in the old auditorium there. So I'm not sure who's going to lead that yet, but I'll rope somebody into leading that prayer time. So if you'd like to stick around this Sunday afternoon and pray, would encourage you to do that as well. So that's what's coming up on Sunday. We're also going to be doing Lord's Supper on Sunday, so it'll be good full Sunday. And then Linda, do you want to say anything about?
This Sunday we are going to record a hymn sing for Shore Haven's residents. And so if anybody wants to take part in doing a special or even just being in the congregation and singing the congregational songs, I'm going to have a meal after the afternoon service, just a real quick, simple meal, and then we're going to record at 1:30. So if anybody's interested, please let me know so I know how many. What? What's for lunch? What's for lunch? So you know whether to come or not?
Steak. I heard it was steak.
I haven't decided, depends on how many people come,
This
but
Sunday.
so surprise.
Wow. Is that after the?
Mm-hmm. All right, we're going to sing Nearer, Still Nearer. And so I think one of my favorite verses that has that idea of drawing near to God is Hebrews 10. And we can draw near to God because of the ministry of Jesus Christ, our great high priest who has shed his blood for us. And made us able, qualified to draw nearer. And so we are encouraged, after we dwell on that truth of Jesus as our high priest, we are encouraged to draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. So many blessed. If you're a Jew and you hear those words, your minds go back to Moses and the law and how they initiated the tabernacle, and now to think that we are, every saint is, and we can draw near is a precious, precious truth. So then, with that thought in our head, he says, let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. So let's sing that idea of drawing near to God and the privilege that is. 511, Nearer, Still Nearer. Nearer, still nearer, close to thy heart. Draw me, my Savior, so precious thou art. Fold me, oh, fold me, close to thy breast. Shelter me safe in that haven of rest. Shelter me safe in that haven of rest. Nearer, still nearer, nothing I bring, not as an offering to Jesus my King, only my sinful, now contrite heart. Grant me the cleansing thy blood doth impart. Grant me the cleansing thy blood doth impart. Nearer, still nearer, Lord, to me thine. Sin with its follies I gladly resign. All of its pleasures, pomp and its pride. Jesus, my Lord crucified, give me but Jesus, my Lord crucified. 511 on the last. Nearer, still nearer, while life shall last, till safe in glory my anchor is cast. Through endless ages, ever to be nearer, my Savior, still nearer to thee. Nearer, my Savior, still nearer to thee. Amen. Pastor Stevens, come on up.
Last verse took me back to my Navy days. Till safe in glory my anchor is cast. I clearly remember hearing the clank of those huge anchor chains going through the housing and safe in the harbor. And then I looked at the date this hymn was written, and it was back in the 1800s. And ships were a little bit different back then. And I'm sure coming safe into harbor was much more reassuring than those days. Genesis chapter 7. I'm going to read a couple of verses, then I'm going to go back to several verses in chapter 1 just to get the connection. So, chapter 7, we're looking at verse 10 to begin with. And I'm just going to go ahead and read 10 through 16 for now. And it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. And the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. In the selfsame day entered Noah, and Shem, and Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them, into the ark. They and every beast after his kind, and all the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth after his kind, and every fowl after his kind, every bird of every sort. And they went in unto Noah into the ark, 2 and 2 of all flesh, wherein is the breath of life. And they that went in male and female of all flesh, as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. So, verse 10 makes it sound like everybody got into the ark and then nothing happened for 7 days. It's a little bit hard to tell because the ark is boarded, then it's 7 days, and then it talks about the ark being boarded again. So possibly it took 7 days just to kind of get settled in. I don't know. It really doesn't matter. But apparently for 7 days nothing happened, and then the windows of heaven were open. I want to go back to, this was on the 600th year of the 2nd month, the 17th day. I want to go back to chapter 1 and just read a couple of verses here again to remind us of how things were on the first day of creation, or the original creation. The earth was without form and void. Verse 2, the earth was without form and void. So what you have here at this point in time is just a globe, just kind of a watery matrix. You couldn't see visible land or anything like that. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, let there be light. There was light. Skipping down to verse 6, and God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. Does anybody remember what that word firmament refers to? Yes. Yes. Or what we would think of as the atmosphere, okay? So, verse 7, God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the 2nd day. And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear, and it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. So, waters above the firmament from the waters below the firmament. Water that was still on planet Earth, but here's all this water above the atmosphere. And I know I talked about it, and you've probably read about it probably years ago, that creation scientists believe that water was in the form of a vapor canopy that surrounded the entire Earth. And it makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons, some of which, of course, occurred during the time of the flood. But that it would have created what kind of a climate? Moist, greenhouse effect, tropical type of climate. So, no polar ice caps, anything like that. And shielding out the harmful rays of the sun. And so many things would just indicate that that probably is exactly what the case was. So the windows of heaven are open. Also, the waters above and below the firmament prevented wind and rainstorms. It was never cold. And this had to have contained vast quantities of water, this, what I believe, water vapor of canopy. And the Bible talks about the fountains of the great deep breaking up. You know, those who want to make fun of the fact that we believe that there was actually a biblical flood that covered the entire earth would ask the question, where in the world did all that water come from? Well, where was a lot of it already? Already on the earth. Any of you ever done a cruise from one to another country, all the way across the ocean? Just me? I did, I think, 3 cruises or something like that. It just, you turn 360 degrees and all you see is water. You can actually see the curvature of the earth from that far away. And it would take days and days and months and weeks and months to get to wherever we were going. That's a lot of water, right? Plus there's water inland. And so, you've already got all that. But then the Bible talks about the fountains of the great deep. And I'm going to read some comments from Henry Morris because he says it a whole lot better than I can. His comments on this firmament. Here's what he says. The waters below the firmament became what is referred to as the great deep, or the great depths of water. This was water in the liquid state, visible especially to the first man in the form of the antediluvian seas in Genesis 1:10, and rivers in Genesis 2:10 through 14. These rivers were not produced by runoff from rainfall because there was no rain in those days, according to Genesis 2:5. There was dew that watered the ground, but emerged through controlled fountains or springs, evidently from deep-seated sources in or below the earth's crust. There's an interesting reference to the abundant supplies of water pouring forth from these fountains of the great deep in Proverbs 8:24, which reads this: when there were no depths, I was brought forth, when there were no fountains abounding with water, before the mountains were settled, before the hills were brought forth, and so on. So probably a reference to pre-flood days and to this great deep. Such subterranean reservoirs were apparently all interconnected with each other, as well as with the surface seas into which the rivers drained, so that the entire complex constituted one great deep. So it's not like we would think of lakes here, rivers here. It was all, this is the theory, that it was all connected. The energy for repressurizing and recycling the waters must have come from the Earth's own subterranean heat implanted there at creation. This entire system must have been a marvelous heat engine which would have operated with wonderful effectiveness indefinitely as long as the Earth's internal heat endured and as long as the system of reservoirs, valves, governors, and conduits maintained their structure. The details of its design were not revealed, but such a system is quite feasible hydraulically and thermodynamically, and there is no reason to question the Creator's ability to provide for the world he had made. When the time for the destruction of this world arrived, however, all that was required was to bring the two deeps, in quotes, together again, as they had been when first created. So remember, at first, it's all just one ball of water, and everything that would create land and minerals and so on, all mixed up in together. The waters above the firmament must be condensed and precipitated, and the waters below the crust must burst their bonds and escape again to the surface. So there was all this water, subterranean water, that gushed up, and we know that the topography of the earth was greatly altered because of the flood. There are indications of volcanic eruptions on the seafloor, earthquakes that took place, and those could have caused the canopy to collapse, not necessarily. God might have just said, okay, rain. but it could have caused that. And so where did all that water come from? Not a problem. More than enough water covered the face of the earth. So possibly, according to verses 9 and 10, 13 and 14, Noah and his family took a week moving in. They were there for quite a long time, so getting settled in, finding a place to put everything and so on. And then Noah and his family entered, and in verse 13, we talked about verse 13 to 15, the rain began, and in verse 16, the Lord shut him in. So the flood did two things. One was that it accomplished death and judgment, but it also accomplished something else, and that would be cleansing and deliverance. Why don't you take your Bibles and turn to 1 Peter chapter 3, and let's just look for a moment at verses 20 and 21. 1 Peter chapter 3, 20 and 21. Which sometime were disobedient, when once the long-suffering of God waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was preparing, wherein few, that is, 8 souls, were saved by, or literally through, water. The water, there's a sense in which the water saved them, although the like figure, whereunto even baptism also does not save, not the putting away of the filth of the flesh, but the answer of a good conscience toward God. So there's not only the destruction of the wickedness of mankind, but there also was this purifying effect that took place. And so Noah and his family were saved through the waters, and even in a sense by the waters. So it's a whole new environment by the time they disembark from the ark. And baptism pictures the destruction of the old life and elevation to the new life. Baptism does not confer any grace. It's an act of obedience. It's a picture of, I am dead and buried with Christ. The old me is gone. The new me is now risen up to new life. It's the first step of obedience, I believe, for a new believer, and pictures our identification with Christ. It's a testimony to everybody who happens to know about it that we do belong to him. And so there's that parallel that's drawn here in 1 Peter to the flood. Baptism picturing the destruction of the old life, elevation to new life. The flood creating the water of death and judgment, also the cleansing and deliverance. And then as we continue on into chapter 7, Genesis chapter 7 and verse 17, through 24, I think I'll just go ahead and read those verses. There's not a lot to say about them other than I want to read another long quote from Henry Morris. So 17 through 24. And the flood was 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased, and bare up the ark, and it was lift up above the earth. And the waters prevailed, and were increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark went upon the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. And all flesh died that moved upon the earth, both of fowl and of cattle, and of beast, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, and every man, all in whose nostrils was the breath of life. And all that was in the dry land died, and every living substance was destroyed which was upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle, and the creeping things, and the fowl of the heaven. They were destroyed from the earth, and Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark, and the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. Of course, we don't know what the population was in those days, but just think of the horrific, cataclysmic incident that was. That not only all humans, but all animals that breathe through their nostrils, that would, of course, eliminate sea life. They didn't have to go in the ark. So the only living beings left other than marine animals are in the ark. And when you think about that, when you think about that vast destruction, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? There's no wrong answer here, by the way. Yeah. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. And let's broaden that a little bit. Why judgment? Okay, God's plan is eternal from eternity past. He's got everything all planned out. Okay, Andrea?
We studied today about the severe consequence of sin and suffering.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at. They're looking for the severe consequences of sin. And I wonder if any of us really can conceive of that from God's, especially from God's perspective. You know, you see a lot of judgment taking place in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, and then in the future in the book of Revelation, which we need to kind of let sink in and try to wrap our minds around how horrific sin is in the sight of God, but how we tend to kind of whitewash it, you know? I think even as Christians, we need to be careful about realizing if sin sent Jesus Christ to the cross to pay the price for our sins and all that, what's coming in the future in the place called hell. So again, comments from Henry Moore. Such a flood would have destroyed every physiographic feature on or near the Earth's surface, redepositing the eroded materials all over the world in stratified sedimentary rocks of the Earth's crust. Do we find any evidence of that? All over the globe. Not only do such sedimentary rocks abound all over the world, but they give much evidence of having been formed by rapid and continuous depositional processes. Each individual stratum is a distinct sedimentary unit, and in most formations can be shown by hydraulic analysis to have been formed within a few minutes' time, not millions and billions of years. Furthermore, it can be shown that within a series of conformable strata, each subsequent stratum began to be deposited immediately after the preceding one. When the strata above and below a given interface are not conformable, such a surface is called an unconformity by geologists, then a significant time gap is indicated. However, since there are no worldwide unconformities, did you get that word worldwide? None. One can always find a place at which any given formation does grade conformably and imperceptibly into another formation above it without a time gap. The obvious conclusion from such syllogistic reasoning is that since each unit in the geological column was formed rapidly, and since each unit was followed immediately by another unit above it, therefore the whole column was formed rapidly. Thus, the geological evidence demands a catastrophic rather than a uniformitarianism explanation. For example, if it is assumed reasonably that the average thickness of sedimentary rocks around the world is about 1 mile, and the average rate of deposition during the flooding conditions is 1 inch of compacted sediment every 5 minutes, then it would only take 220 days to form the entire column. The existence of fossils in these sedimentary deposits is further evidence that they were formed rapidly. Fossils are so ubiquitous and so important, in fact, that they constitute the chief means of assigning a geological age to a given formation, as deduced from the presumed stage of evolution of its fossil contents. However, the preservation of fossils requires rapid burial and lithification, or else they will be destroyed by decay or scavengers. In addition to the testimony of the sedimentary processes which formed them and the fossils contained in them, all of the different types of sedimentary rocks and igneous and metamorphic rocks as well give strong evidence that they could never have been produced by modern uniformitarian processes. The same is true of geologic structures such as mountains, canyons, alluvial plains, and so forth. More and more evolutionary geologists today are returning to the concept of at least a local catastrophism as the explanation for all types of geological features and formations. And so, the evidence is there all over the world. What do you, I'm sure all of you are aware of this, you've heard it before, but what unique things are often found on the top of mountains? Fossils. Which would indicate what? Yeah. And not only fossils, but anybody know what else? Sea salt. The evidence is there. Why do people not believe it? Why do they insist on creating some other explanation? Well, they just don't want to accept the fact that there's a God that they're going to be answerable to someday. Plus the fact that Satan has blinded the minds. And I know you experience the same frustration I do in wondering why in the world can't people see this, the Lord has left behind so many evidences that of creation, of the flood, so many things that if we'll just only look at it and give the logical explanation for it, which even educated geologists have had to conclude are true, you would think that would be sufficient, but of course it isn't. So what do you call that? Natural revelation. God has left plenty of that behind. Okay, I think we'll stop there for now. Any comments, questions before we go on? All right. I do have a short letter from the Cars. Spring is here. Oh, yeah? Spring might be there. And we are marching on. Our rent is paid until the end of March, and there are 2 other builders who will stay for the month of April to finish the final details in the building. Next week, we will be packed up and moving to Rockford, Michigan. Please pray for a good and safe transition.